The Braves tricked us. Let's discuss. Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on Tuesday, March 21st. Frank Stampfl joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. Today on the show, Vaughn Grissom sent back to the minors. We'll have a bullpen breakdown, updates on all the teams in baseball and who we think is going to lead their respective teams in saves this season, and then sneaky players to target in keeper leagues. Before we get into all of it, make sure to like this video, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you're listening on the audio side, please download, follow, and leave a 5-star review. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much. And we've got some fun pods coming up this week. Tomorrow, a live head-to-head points draft that will actually be playing out this season. It's our listener league. And then the following day, we'll have a full prospect breakdown with the latest info, who made the team. Hopefully, we'll have even more by then. And we'll get the Welsh's thoughts on all of those players as well. A couple days after losing Jose Altuve and likely Jorge Polanco to at least start the season on the IL, both Vaughn Grissom and Braden Shoemake were sent down by the Atlanta Braves. Has nothing to do with what Grissom could do offensively, because on Monday, Grissom went 3 for 4 with a stolen base, wound up hitting .371 throughout spring training, and then they call him into the office and they say, "Sorry, bud, but you're getting sent down." It clearly has everything to do with defense. And something I've seen from multiple Braves beat writers is that the Braves need more defense at shortstop to start the season, because Ozzie Albies doesn't have his full arm strength yet at second base. So I think that kind of factored into the decision. But Scott, we'll start with you. Is Vaughn Grissom still worth drafting as a stash in a standard 12-team league? And how are you handling the rest of this Braves situation?
Well, I think, and I'm going to be writing about the top 10 prospects to stash at the start of the year. And I do think Vaughn Grissom will be among that group, or either I'll lead with him and make like an honorable mention out of him because he's not technically a prospect anymore because he got too many at-bats last year. So in that one respect, yes, I don't want to bury Vaughn Grissom over this news. I think it's a little more complicated than just he's not quite there defensively. And I think a central figure in this whole situation is, funnily enough, it's one of the hardest names to pronounce. Ehire Adrianza.
That's right.
Utility infielder who doesn't have minor league options, who is shortstop capable. So if either Grissom or Shoemake made the roster, they would have to get rid of this major league viable shortstop. And that's the second hardest position to fill. So I think a lot of it is just, well, we don't want to have to forfeit him when we're not sure about Grissom defensively yet, and we're not sure about Shoemake offensively yet. Because remember, what we were talking about yesterday was, okay, it's coming down to Grissom or Shoemake. Depends whether they buy into Grissom's defensive improvement or Shoemake's offensive improvements more. And so the fact that they sent both of them down tells me it's more of a stall tactic than anything else. They want to gauge both of these players' improvements more. And I have seen from Braves beat writers that the plan is for Grissom to play mostly shortstop at AAA, Shoemake mostly second base, so that he can get more comfortable with that position. And so that they can continue to evaluate Grissom at shortstop. Like you said, Frank, we saw Grissom back at shortstop in the spring training game. So they're not giving up on Grissom as a shortstop yet, clearly. Furthermore, Arcia is not going to be somebody who stays at shortstop for them all season, because he's like the worst of both worlds. He doesn't offer much defensively. He doesn't offer much offensively. So like this just looks like a stall tactic to me, bottom line. And eventually one of Shoemake and Grissom is going to be, or Grissom's going to be the Braves shortstop. My hope and my guess is it's still going to be Grissom eventually, but I can't say that with certainty. I can't know when it'll be. So I think in standard 12-team leagues, he's probably outside the draftable range. But if you've already drafted him in a league where, say, 350 or more players are rostered, you better have a good reason to drop him. There better be someone of genuine interest for you, because there's a good chance Grissom still makes a considerable fantasy impact this year, just maybe from May 1st on or whenever. Look, maybe Arcia strains his hamstring on opening day. Who are they bringing up at that point? Probably Grissom. maybe Shoemaker, but probably Grissom. And so, yeah, I'm seeing a lot of takes out there like, I told you Grissom couldn't hack it at shortstop. And I just wanna like cool people's jets on that, because we're gonna see a lot of moves here in the coming days that are just kind of procedural related, Like, for instance, the Angels catcher situation, same thing. Logan O'Hoppe is one of the Angels' best 2 catcher options. I think that's pretty clear. But catcher is the hardest position to fill in the majors. And if Matt Theis doesn't make the roster, the Angels just lose him. He doesn't have options. So that probably means O'Hoppe's going to the minors just so they don't have to forfeit a major league viable catcher. And that's sometimes decisions GMs have to make this time of year, which is all to say, it's a very long season. It doesn't always, like, sometimes we make too much, I think, whether it's health related or this sort of situation. Who's on the opening day roster? And in the grand scheme of things, that's of little significance.
Another example would be like the Marlins seemingly going with Jesus Sanchez over Brian De La Cruz, at least in part because Sanchez doesn't have options and De La Cruz does.
Yes.
See if this player can do something for you before you have to make a decision on them. It's something like the Giants do something similar where they like to churn the back like last spot on their roster just to like take a chance on guys that are getting released just to see if you can figure something out. And if you don't, you just move on. And I think that's what we'll see here is like Adrianza and Arcia. We're pretty sure they're not good, but maybe they surprise you.
And it's not even that they have to be good. It's just that what if things go wrong and we've already burnt through a shortstop option who could have helped us? Meanwhile, we can continue to evaluate Grissom and Shoemaker in the minors. So let's go ahead and keep Adrianza around for now. And then if a shortstop gets hurt, we don't have to go picking through the scrap heap for another. Yeah. So those are now I understand in fantasy, like, opening day jobs are important because you have only so much roster space and you want to protect the players that are most worth protecting. And somebody who's out of sight is going to be out of mind and probably belongs on waivers in the majority of leagues. As I said, easier when it's an injured player and you have an IL spot. Okay. But if it's a minor leaguer, like Grissom is going to be at the start of the year, harder to justify the bench spot on that. I get it. But he still should be very much in your thoughts as the first few weeks of the season are playing out.
Looking at Scott's rankings now, and Vaughn Grissom is down to 28 at second base. So behind names like Michael Massey, who I think all kind of like as a deep sleeper this year, Bryson Stott, and Luis Arias. Chris, let me ask you this. Any interest in Orlando Arcia in deeper leagues? Last year, he hit 244 with 9 home runs in 68 games. Pretty high average exit velocity for a middle infielder, 90.7 miles per hour. You like to see that. He posted a career high 7.5% barrel rate as well. Any interest in Arcia playing in a really good lineup?
No, I think it's an NL only type of player. Even if he did get to 19 home runs over the course of a season, which was his pace last season, I don't think he'd give you much else. He's almost certainly going to bat at the bottom of the lineup. He's not going to give you much batting average. I don't see much to be excited about there.
All right. And before we get into some other things, I did want to bring up, and this is something I missed on Sunday, so apologies, but Juan Soto was removed from a minor league game as a precaution due to a mild oblique strain. He had the calf earlier in spring, and they were kind of slow rolling him in spring training and in the WBC. Now it's an oblique strain for Juan Soto. Chris, do you have any concerns drafting Soto? I mean, you drop him down a little bit to like the end of the first round, or is it just going to continue drafting him where you were before?
Yeah, I mean the margins in the like 6 through 12-ish range are fairly slim, so I could see dropping him down behind Kyle Tucker and Yordan Alvarez. The oblique, even if it is a minor issue, is more of a concern for me than the calf was earlier, just because oblique injuries have a tendency to linger longer than you would expect and have a tendency to get worse at inopportune moments. So yeah, like if you want to drop him, I had him 7th. If you wanted to drop him to 9th, that makes sense.
Scott, any thoughts on Juan Soto?
I mean, as of now, I'm not dropping him. I've been pretty, what's the word? After having a lot of doubts about Alvarez Soto bets, how should I rank them? I've been pretty firm on Soto being at the top of that group, number 6 after the obvious top 5. And I went to bed seeing this news and I'm like, oh no, is this going to be a whole drama tomorrow? Oblique issue for Soto. And I wake up and basically nobody's talking about it, which leads me to believe it really is just kind of a day-to-day thing as they're presenting it, a precautionary removal. So unless I have reason to believe otherwise, I'm going to stick with Soto 6th.
All right. Well, we'll get more into some news and notes later on, but that's what we've got going on right now. Vaughn Grissom and Braden Shoemake sent down by the Atlanta Braves, and Juan Soto dealing with an oblique injury. Chris, you did a draft on Monday, a 14-team draft, and you did not take a starting pitcher until round 10. And you text me, yeah, I kind of want to get Scott's thoughts on this. So that's exactly what we're going to
talk. I did an FSG or Sirius XM fantasy radio hit, and I told them, I wanted to see if I could one-up Scott because I know he doesn't have the stamina to go a full 10 rounds without a pitcher. Especially in a 14-team league.
I think the latest I've waited in a league this year was round 9. And I was happy with my pitching staff, but that was a 12-teamer, not a 14-teamer.
Yeah, so this one's a little bit deeper, and Chris waited even longer. So the pitching staff wound up like this. Nick Lodolo, who looked amazing once again on Monday, 6 shutout innings with 8 strikeouts. Reed Detmers, Patrick Sandoval, Edward Cabrera, Garrett Whitlock, Trevor Rogers, Tyler Anderson. So you get one of the Mount Rushmore or whatever you want to call him at this point. Drake Jameson, Josiah Gray, and Cole Irvin. The relievers, Pete Fairbanks and Dylan Floro. Scott's kind of covering his face. I don't know. What do you think, Scott?
I mean, I do have Nick Lodolo as an ace on my NL only team, and thought maybe I would have liked a better number 1 in that even much deeper league. So and
Reed Detmers are going to be competing for the ace spot here, Scott.
Yeah.
No, it's not a good pitching staff. Just like I wish I had been able to get one more of that of the Golden Girls, which we've all agreed we're calling them.
The Mount Rushmore.
I had them in my queue, and I just didn't pull the trigger on them. So
yeah,
it was a case where like Chris Sale went earlier than I expected. I would have been happy to have him. So it was it wasn't necessarily the plan going in, although I wanted to see how far I could push it. But yeah, it's the weakest pitching staff I've drafted all year for sure.
I'll say this, like there's a clear vulnerability there. And normally I don't feel like my pitching staff's that vulnerable, even when I wait a long time to draft my ace. And part of it is because I do have confidence in that group of 4 unexciting pitchers who all were top 40 last year. And so if I'm going to go super weak at pitching, I need to get at least 2 and probably 3 of them. You took just the one, Tyler Anderson, who's only my 3rd favorite of the group. So that kind of makes me recoil a little bit just because I don't feel like I have those stabilizers to go with the high upside types. But if you hit on a couple of those upside plays, if you hit on 3 of those upside plays, let's say, like Lodolo, Detmers, and Trevor Rogers all end up being everything we hope they can be, then I think you should be able to make that work through aggressive waiver wire maneuvering. I mean, that's the thing. That's half the equation to going weak at starting pitching is
being very aggressive on the waiver wire.
Yeah, like recognizing that that's where most of the waiver wire talent is going to come at that position. And so like you're leaning into the volatility, the good side of the volatility at starting pitcher.
But would you guys like to hear the offense?
I was getting ready to read it, but you can do the honors, sir.
Alejandro Kirk, Omar Narvaez, backup catcher's not great. Vinny P, baby.
Yeah.
Baby. DJ LeMahieu. That's my replacement for Jose Altuve for the first 6 weeks of the season because I have Jose Altuve.
Okay.
Fernando Tatis, Nolan Arenado, Ezequiel Tovar, who will slide into the shortstop spot for Fernando Tatis for the first couple of weeks of the season. Mookie Betts, Eloy Jimenez, Cedric Mullins, Lars Nootbaar, George Springer, Spencer Torkelson, and Spencer Steer with Alec Thomas and Jose Altuve and Francisco Alvarez, who was an auto pick. For some reason, it didn't take the top guy in my queue, which is kind of an annoying thing. But yeah, that was frustrating.
I mean, I was a little underwhelmed until you got to that outfield. That outfield in a 14-team league, especially.
Yeah. Wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's going to require some juggling. It's going to require a little bit of good luck, to manage the Altuve injury, especially Altuve maybe a little overkill. I probably could have just taken a starting pitcher, but I think he was my 9th round pick. I think he was 120th overall. That's 30 spots later. And so it was one of those situations where I didn't want to take him and he just kept falling. And so I think it was once Chris Sale went the previous round, I took Jose Altuve. I think that was the process there.
All right. So what happens when you wait on starting pitching in a very deep league? Well, you just heard it. I think this pitching staff would be really fun in a K per 9 league, Chris.
Yeah.
The whip is going to be a problem. As much as I like Lodolo, probably going to be a higher whip guy. Sandoval, lots of walks. Cabrera, lots of walks. Trevor Rogers, lots of hits and walks potentially. I mean, I know he had a really bad whip last year. So that's going to be a problem. But the strikeouts could be fun. We'll see if some of those guys can break out. Let's take our first break a little bit early here. But when we get back, we'll get into each team's bullpen here on Fantasy Baseball Today.
Bring on the roars. Major style points. Oh, yes.
All right, welcome back into Fantasy Baseball Today. Reminder that we are a finalist in the baseball category for the Sports Podcast Awards, and we are going up against some big names. And it's a voting system, which means we need your help. You can scan the QR code in the top right corner if you're watching on YouTube, or find the link in the podcast or YouTube description. You'll need to quickly create an account on their website, which I know is annoying, but it takes less than a minute, and then vote for FBT. Voting ends on April 6th. And we really do appreciate it. Scott has a bullpen breakdown article that's coming out on Tuesday morning, so make sure to be on the lookout for that. And you can kind of read that, follow along while we're doing this. But we'll go through each bullpen, see what's happening throughout spring training, and make a prediction on who we think will lead their team in saves. The Orioles, no surprise, Felix Bautista, he's back in spring. Velocity has been down a little bit. I think he had 3 walks here on Monday in an appearance, but just getting through the spring healthy, I think, will be a win for Felix Bautista. For the Red Sox, Kenley Jansen. For the Yankees, Clay Holmes for now. And then we get into the Rays, Pete Fairbanks or Jason Adam. Fairbanks, I've really liked all offseason. It's worth noting his fastball velocity was down 3 miles per hour on Sunday, and he does have an extensive injury history. Chris, you just drafted Fairbanks. Your thoughts on the Rays bullpen?
Well, even if Fairbanks was throwing 99 miles an hour and looking like he did last season, I'd be worried about the number of saves he's going to get, just because it's the Rays, and I don't have a lot of confidence that they're going to just stick one guy in the 9th inning and roll with him as the closer for 40 straight saves. But yeah, I think there's certainly some risk there, especially with the fact that the velocity's down. It is interesting that he's also introduced a new splitter into his arsenal this offseason in spring training. He only threw 3 of them on Sunday, so we don't really have a lot to go on there. But yeah, it's a little concerning because in 2020 and 2021, he had decent ERAs, but the whip was near 1.4 both seasons. I think it was above that in one. So, it might be a situation where he had 3 walks in 26 innings or whatever it was last season. It might be one of those situations where he's got really good control when the stuff is great, but he never has good command, that distinction between the two, which is a concern I have with someone like Ryan Helsley as well, where if he goes back to throwing 97, all of a sudden, is he going to get as many chases? So yeah, I think there's some concern there, but I would guess Fairbanks gets the first opportunity.
Yeah, that would be my guess as well. They gave him a contract extension this offseason, so we don't have to worry about any kind of arbitration hoopla or anything like that. Even if Fairbanks gives you 20 saves this year, I think that he will pay off his price tag, and I do like him quite a bit myself. For the Blue Jays, it is Jordan Romano. The White Sox, they are saying committee as long as Liam Hendricks is out, and he's trying to return from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is obviously much more important than baseball, but this is what we are left with on the White Sox roster. My lean right now, Scott, is Reynaldo Lopez, who has been much better than Kendall Graveman this spring. What do you think about those two? Or anyone else in the White Sox bullpen?
Well, I mean, if they do go full-blown committee, Aaron Bummer would probably be the left-hander who would factor into that mix, but he's a distant third in terms of who I would want in fantasy. I do have Kendall Graveman ahead of Lopez, mostly just as a matter of seniority. It's nearly a coin flip, though, who I'd prefer in fantasy. Graveman does tend to go earlier.
Man,
It's not where I'm making much of an investment, I would say.
Remember when this bullpen was just absurdly stacked and they had like 4 closer caliber pitchers, like literally 2 years ago?
Mhm.
And now it's like, looks kind of rough.
Yeah. I mean, Kendall Graveman does have some history in a closer's role. Ronaldo Lopez does not. But yeah, I mean, things kind of flipped very quickly here for the White Sox. The Guardians, Emmanuel Clase, obviously for the Tigers. Alex Lang, I think that was just kind of the de facto once they traded away Gregory Soto. He's looked pretty bad this spring, 3 earned runs in 4 innings pitched, 6 walks to 5 strikeouts. So we know control is a really, really big issue for Alex Lang. It's got 2 very dark horses. I mean, I'm just throwing names out there. They've done really well in spring. Trey Wingenter, who's like been out of baseball since 2019, and Miguel Diaz, 6 1/3 shutout with 12 strikeouts. And Trevor Rosenthal could be back by June. It's a messy bullpen and a bad team. What do you think?
Yeah, so in my bullpen breakdown, the pecking order I actually put was Alex Lang, followed by Jose Cisnero and Will Best. So I wasn't. You came up with completely different names than the ones I was considering, which is part of the reason why I think Alex Lang is still the one to have here. I don't have a lot of confidence in him. He does have major control issues. So did Gregory Soto, and they hung with him through thick and thin last year in spite of it. Alex Lang, for the control issues, his like dominance measurables are off the charts. Like swinging strike rate is up there with like Edwin Diaz and Andres Munoz. So you can understand why he emerged as a favorite. And just that there's a lack of clear alternatives. I think he remains so, but it's a low confidence pick for sure.
Alex Lang last year with the Tigers had 21 holds and a 19% swinging strike rate that Scott was just referencing. An elite mark, but he's got to be able to throw strikes. The Royals, Scott Barlow has been better than Aroldis Chapman so far this spring. They've both been pretty good. But Chris, I feel like you've been on the side of, hey, they signed Aroldis Chapman for a reason. Maybe at least during the first half of the season, they'll look to get him more involved.
Yeah, and to be clear, I don't think that reason is like we think having Aroldis Chapman as our closer gives us the best chance to win. I would guess him and Scott Barlow are pretty similar in terms of their quality as pitchers, and so I have a really hard time seeing Aroldis Chapman being okay with being the setup man for the Royals. Like that's just. There's not a lot there. I can't say there's like a concrete explanation or even like a quote from a coach. It's just like the guy who walked away from a team with a legitimate championship shot because he was unhappy with his usage is going to be fine on a 77 win Royals team as a setup man. Seems unlikely, but maybe.
Chris, what a nice thing for you to say. The Yankees actually had a chance at a championship title.
They were one of 30 teams with a chance last year.
I don't know about that.
I mean, remember the start they got off to last year was, I mean, they were the ones on the historic pace even before the Dodgers were, right? So, and the fact that Aroldis Chapman is a generational closing talent, somebody who I think will be have a fringe Hall of Fame candidacy when all is said and done. It's as much for me the Royals' incentive as whatever Chapman's response is itself.
Yes.
Like, why would this obvious non-contender sign a closer with that sort of history to a 1-year deal, if not to resuscitate his value and flip him? And the best way to resuscitate his value is to have him accumulating saves. It doesn't mean it's automatically going to happen. The Royals GM actually said after signing Chapman, Scott Barlow is our closer. But I think if Chapman looks more like Aroldis Chapman at the start of this year than he has the past 2 years, then that's going to be what determines it. And it has nothing to do with the way Scott Barlow performs. It's entirely dependent on how Chapman performs. If he looks like Aroldis Chapman again, then he is going to be at least in a 50-50 timeshare with Barlow and perhaps more.
Obviously, everything during spring training is a small sample, but 9 strikeouts to 2 walks over 5 innings pitched for Chapman. That's pretty impressive so far.
That's what you want to see, at least.
Yeah, we'll see if he can keep it up. Let's move over to the Twins, which looks like it is a committee as well with Yohan Duran and Jorge Lopez. The Twins have kept saves totals down in the past with arbitration eligible players. It's something that Taylor Rogers has openly talked about in the past. So Duran would fit that category. And he recently suffered a leg contusion over the weekend after getting hit by a line drive. Doesn't sound like it's major, but it's something to notice. Just to note for now. Scott, how are you playing the Duran versus Jorge Lopez bullpen right now?
Oh, I'm totally on Duran. Jorge Lopez was pretty disastrous after coming over to the Twins. Like, everything tanked, including the strikeout rate. And I know they haven't, like, Rocco Baldelli's MO with them has been to, even when Taylor Rogers was there, to mix it up. He's been as committed to the committee as any manager outside of Kevin Cash in Tampa Bay. So I don't think it's a situation where Yohan Duran's going to get 30, 35 saves for the Twins. But they were turning to him more and more down the stretch last season when Lopez was struggling. He's clearly the most talented reliever in that bullpen. And so I view it as a similar situation to like a Peter Fairbanks for the Rays or a Paul Sewald for the Mariners, where it might be a 65-35 or a 60-40 split, but that is the guy I want from that bullpen.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that too. I think if Duran could get you 21, at least 20 saves, same thing as Fairbanks. Like, he is going to be a breakout reliever. I think the ratios and strikeouts will be awesome once again for Duran this season. Last year, once Lopez joined the Minnesota Twins, he had a 4.37 ERA, 1.63 whip. So he was quite awful. For the Astros, we know it's Ryan Presley, as long as he's healthy, of course. For the Angels, who knows? Carlos Estevez has an ERA over 15 so far this spring, 10 walks in 4 2/3 innings pitched. We recently heard that Jimmy Herget can work back into the closer's role to start the year. He kind of ended the season in that role last year. I keep bringing up Matt Moore. He has not had a very good spring. The name we have not mentioned at all is Ben Joyce, who was a 3rd-round pick last year. He throws over 100 miles per hour with the fastball, and so far this spring, 5 shutout with 6 strikeouts to 4 walks. Control can be an issue at times. Chris, any lean here on the Angels bullpen on March 20th?
I would guess Herget, but was Joyce? Yeah, he was the University of Tennessee guy. He's super fun.
Oh, yes.
Regularly, he had like 105 in a game last year, I believe. It's one of the hardest thrown pitches I've ever seen. Granted, it was a college radar gun. We don't, you know how college students are. But I would love to see him get an opportunity. I think it'd be very interesting. If you need saves, Herget would be the guy, but I don't necessarily love investing anything in him.
And I don't think Joyce is expected to make the team for what it's worth.
He hasn't. I don't think so either, Scott. But he hasn't been sent down yet.
Yeah.
So it's worth pointing out. I don't think he'll start as a team's closer, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's a mess by the time we get to May 1st and this team is actually trying to compete. Ben Joyce could get called up, and he's pretty much just built for that role. So we'll see what happens with the Angels. For the Oakland A's, there was a report back in February from a beat writer who thought it was Danny Jimenez's job to lose. Well, he's kind of losing it right now. It's hasn't looked great in the spring. He's given up 4 earned runs over 6 innings pitched. Trevor May, someone I've talked up, also hasn't looked great. He does have 9 strikeouts to 1 walk. Domingo Acevedo has actually looked the best so far, 1.23 ERA, 11 strikeouts, but also 5 walks. Scott, another bad team, not great bullpen. Any lean with the Oakland A's?
No, this is one of my least favorite to try to draft anybody from. It's between the A's and the Marlins and maybe the Diamondbacks, though I think my current favorite for the Diamondbacks is my favorite between those three teams. We'll get to them soon enough. But as for the A's, like Trevor May is pretty much who every fantasy analyst has been talking about as the closer there. I haven't seen a lot of official reports from beat writers, or certainly nothing coming from the team that would single out May in the way he's been singled out in fantasy. So I'm sure some people would highly recommend drafting May. That's, they're that confident he's going to be the guy. I'm not that confident he's going to be the guy. If you're forcing me to choose somebody from the A's bullpen, okay, I'll go along with the crowd and say May, but not with nearly as much confidence.
Ask me a week into the season, and hopefully the A's have had a save opportunity by then.
That's very fair. Part of the reason I did like May before is I was just following the money. I mean, they gave him a 1-year, $7 million deal. The Oakland A's do not spend any money. So I think that's kind of, with the intention similar to Aroldis Chapman with the Kansas City Royals. The Mariners, we've got Paul Sewald and Andres Munoz here. Munoz was supposed to debut this past weekend. He pitched in a B game on Sunday. He's returning from ankle surgery. Paul Sewald had, I believe it was 20 saves last year. Chris, is this another Tampa Bay Rays, Minnesota Twins type situation where Sewald is the favorite for now?
Yeah, I would expect 55% of the saves to go to Sewald maybe, but I like drafting him and Munoz to a certain extent just because they're really good pitchers, and so you should get really good ratios from them. And if you get 20 saves, you're going to be very happy about the investment you made. But yeah, they're more like, I've got my one real save source, and now let's start to speculate kind of guys.
Mm-hmm. I will say, of the three bullpens that we've talked about in that way, the Mariners, the Rays, the Twins with Duran, he has the lowest level of competition in terms of like just quality. The next reliever, the quality of that reliever, not nearly as good as he is. At least, with the Mariners, Sewald and Munoz, they're both good. Same thing in Tampa Bay. Like Jason Adam is very good as well.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely make the case Munoz is more talented than Sewald. Like, I was saying Alex Lang, among relievers who had at least 50 innings last year, the top two in swinging strike rate were Edwin Diaz and actually Andres Munoz. Those are the only two ahead of Alex Lang in swinging strike rate. And so there seems to be a lot of momentum toward Munoz in fantasy right now. But my whole thing with the Mariners bullpen has been, this time last year, we would have loved if Paul Sewald was the favorite for saves for them. That's what we were rooting for. And now that it's happened, we're already turning the page to someone else like that.
Oh,
I don't know.
That's
I mean,
what we do, man.
Sewald's still great. Let's enjoy what we have with him,
That's what we do especially with relievers. We love to do that.
Oh yeah.
We love to throw decent relievers away for the next guy who throws 100. Every team's got 4 of them now.
Let's move over to the Rangers. Bruce Bochy, the manager now. So I think we all kind of think that they'll go with some kind of traditional closer, old school type manager. Jose Leclerc was dealing with a neck injury early on in spring, but seems okay now. And he's pitched very well. 5 2/3 shutout, 9 strikeouts to 4 walks. I've brought up the fact that Will Smith signed during spring training. He had 34 saves with Bruce Bochy back with the Giants in 2019. Even with that being said, I think it's still Jose Leclerc on opening day. We'll see where it goes from there.
Yes, I agree. The fact that Will Smith was away from the team and Jose Leclerc has had a chance to reestablish himself. Leclerc would have been the favorite all along if he hadn't been hurt for the start of spring training. And I think, as with Felix Bautista, suddenly now that he's back, there isn't a lot of doubt whether or not he'll be ready for the season. And I think that makes Leclerc the obvious favorite.
Let's move over to the National League. We'll start off with the Braves, and Raisel Iglesias is the obvious closer candidate there. The Marlins, a bullpen by committee. We've got Dylan Floro, AJ Puck, Tanner Scott, and Matt Barnes. And so far, again, it doesn't really mean much, but AJ Puck has looked the best out of that entire group in spring training. Chris, they've got a new manager here, Skip Schumacher. He says it's going to be a committee. What is your lean with the Marlins?
I mean, it might be a committee moving forward, but I would guess they'll end up going with one person. I would think Dylan Flora will get the first opportunity, but I don't have a ton of confidence that any of them are all that good or that any one of them is ahead right now.
I think Puck is the best. Like, I think he's clearly the best. I just think they are going to value him as like a multi-inning guy and not want to confine him to the ninth inning. I do think Matt Barnes is a legitimate dark horse.
Yeah,
here.
dark horse, yeah.
Yeah, obviously he has the experience closing with the Boston Red Sox. I wanted to look up Tanner Scott's career numbers against lefties because I just wanted to know if they could use him in a big spot against a lefty and save AJ Puck for later in the game. But not enough time. Probably not worth it anyway. Let's move over to the Mets. Edwin Diaz is out for the year, though he has said he wants to return later on in the season. So we'll see if that's a possibility. David Robertson and Adam Ottavino are the next names up here. Brooks Raley, if there's some lefties coming up in the ninth inning, I think that's possible as well. David Robertson gave up a couple of runs. I think it was yesterday on Sunday. Adam Ottavino has looked the best so far this spring. Scott, where are you going with the Mets?
Well, I'm still leaning toward Ottavino. I haven't heard anything clear from beat writers. Some of them in the immediate aftermath of Edwin Diaz were speculating Robertson just because he's the one who got 20 plus saves last year. I think Ottavino is better. He's been kind of inconsistent, so I can't be totally sure of that. But at his best, he's better than David Robertson. And so he's the one I'd lean toward. But they're pretty close in my rankings. And it's another situation that I'd rather not have to get into. I'd rather have my save situation taken care of before I have to draft either one of Ottavino and Robertson. But I do prefer them to any of the Marlins, Athletics, or Diamondbacks choices or Angels choices.
Yeah, it certainly helps that they're on the best team too. Of all those teams with messy bullpens, the Mets are the best of that group. Let's move over to the Phillies, who used a committee approach with manager Rob Thompson last season, and they have Sir Anthony Dominguez. They signed Craig Kimbrell this offseason. Dave Dombrowski is someone who worked with Kimbrell back in the Red Sox days, so they're reunited once again. Jose Alvarado is still on this team. Chris, I kind of feel like Kimbrell gets the first shot. He's looked pretty good so far this spring. 11 strikeouts, just 2 walks. What are you thinking there, Chris, on the Phillies?
I think that's an okay assumption, and he's cheap enough that it doesn't really matter if he doesn't get the first save. You can, if it looks like he's not going to get an opportunity, which I suspect he will, but if it looks like he's not, there's nothing lost in dropping him. So I think he's a fine late round pick.
All right, the Nationals, Kyle Finnegan, still the likely leader, but recently mentioned they plan on using him more in a fireman reliever role this upcoming season. And he's looked pretty good so far this spring. I mean, 5 walks, it's kind of high. Hunter Harvey was thought to be a closer candidate back in the day with the Baltimore Orioles. They have like Carl Edwards. Alex Colomé has looked absolutely awful. Scott, you still leaning with Kyle Finnegan here?
Yeah, they have anointed him as the favored bullpen option. It may not be a traditional closer role, but it will still probably result in him getting the majority of the saves. You just hate to see saves divided up in any way for a team this bad. And it's not like Finnegan, it's not like his ratios are going to be that impressive. So how long will he even be holding on to that fireman role? It's a legitimate question. So this is probably the 5th worst bullpen situation for fantasy ahead of Angels.
And that's only because there's at least some clarity on the hierarchy.
Yeah. So the only ones that are worse, I guess, are Angels, Athletics, Marlins,
Diamondbacks.
Is that all of them?
That's 4.
Yeah. Okay.
Next up, we have the Cubs bullpen, and right now it seems like the leaders in the clubhouse are Michael Fulmer and Brad Boxberger. Both have looked really good this spring. Neither of them has allowed a run. But if we are following draft trends, this weekend there were 9 main event drafts over at the NFBC. Those are $1,700 entries. Michael Fulmer went in round 16 on average. Brad Boxberger in round 25. So, Chris, perhaps they know something we don't.
I don't know if they know something we don't. I just think there's, a sense that Fulmer is a little less of a known quantity and so potentially has more upside. I think he's pretty uninspiring personally. You know, he made the like popular move to just like largely abandon his fastball last season. He threw it 28% of the time, threw the slider 63.5% of the time, which you would think like, oh, great, he's going to get a bunch of strikeouts. And his strikeout rate was actually below average, especially for a reliever last season. I tend to think Michael Fulmer's just not very good after all he's been through, but you know, Brad Boxberger has never been someone that I think the fantasy community has been particularly excited about, and I don't think they will be here. So
there was a little nugget that has me leaning toward Michael Fulmer from The Athletic, where they were kind of just walking through the recruitment process the Cubs had with Michael Fulmer, and in it, they said, oh, the Cubs are looking toward Fulmer and Boxberger in the ninth inning. That's where that nugget came from, was that much bigger article. But it also revealed that the Cubs brass brought up the prospect of closing to Fulmer as part of their pitch to him. And he said, I interpreted that as I'm going to have to earn it. But the point is, it seems like they're going to give him a chance to earn it, which is which tells me he's probably the leader in the clubhouse for it. It's not with a ton of assurance, but I agree with the NFBC drafters, that the main event drafters, that Michael Fulmer is the one to have here.
Sure.
All right. Well, we've got 3 bullpens where we actually think we could name the closer on their respective teams. The Cincinnati Reds, Alexis Diaz. For the Brewers, it's Devin Williams. For the Pirates, David Bednar. Then we get to the Cardinals. I think it's Ryan Helsley, but there's a lot of things that he improved last year that he needs to maintain: velocity, control. And even with that, he didn't get every save chance for the Cardinals. And Giovanni Gallegos, I guess everything besides this final inning against Japan looked pretty good in the WBC. He had 2 saves there as well. Scott, how confident are you that, I don't know, Ryan Helsley is just the closer for the Cardinals?
So I did introduce him to my second round of busts. He joined Bust 2.0. And my concerns for Ryan Helsley were threefold. That A, like just natural regression because his numbers were such outliers, the ERA, the WHIP, all of it. B, a big increase in velocity was partly responsible for that. An inhuman increase in velocity because now he's peaking at 104. And can anybody's arm hold up to that? Can he sustain that? I don't know. And C, yeah, Giovanni Gallegos and Oliver Marmol, the manager's tendencies to mix things up in the ninth inning. And so I still think those are all legitimate concerns for Ryan Helsley, but he has, I think, answered half of one of them.
The fastball.
Yeah, he is rifling that fastball in this spring again. 10 strikeouts in 5 innings so far. So it's Ryan Helsley might have the widest range of outcomes of any closer candidate, because he could be the best closer in fantasy if he's legitimately as dominant as he showed last year, and he does get 90% of the Cardinals' save chances. Or he could be a bust, like the possibility I laid out in Bust 2.0. So I usually opt against drafting him in the range where he's going, but if he's obviously the best choice at relief pitcher at the time I'm looking to take a relief pitcher, I wouldn't shy away from him either.
The Diamondbacks bullpen is currently baseball's biggest mystery. You could take some dice, roll it, see what pops up, because we've got about 6 different names here. Kevin Ginkel, Scott McGuff, Miguel Castro, Joe Mantiply, Cole Sulser, that's right, and Yuri's Familia. They're all names that have looked kind of good so far this spring. Scott, you teased it earlier. Who is the D-backs reliever that you are looking at?
Well, it's a fellow Scott McGuff.
Yeah!
McGough is how you spell that. And he was a closer the last 2 years in Japan and has looked very impressive this spring. He did finally give up a couple runs in his most recent outing, but the strikeout rate has been good. The command has been good. The Diamondbacks coaching staff has had nothing but good things to say about him. It doesn't
Stuff
mean
looks pretty good. Like he doesn't throw super hard, but he's one of those guys who doesn't throw his fastball very often. It's like 30%. But the splitter and slider both look like potential out pitches. So the profile looks okay.
It doesn't mean McGough is going to be the Diamondbacks closer. I imagine it's going to take a few weeks for that to sort out. But I think in the end, he will be the cream that rises. And by early mid-May, we'll be thinking of Scott McGough as the Diamondbacks closer. So kind of going out on a limb for him right now.
Ooh, the cream. The cream always rises to the top, Scotty. I love it. I've got a lot of shares of Scott McGough in deeper draft and hold leagues and NL labor. So let's hope so. The Rockies, Daniel Bard. He's the closer to start, but sinker down almost 3 miles per hour on Saturday in that WBC game. So let's pay attention there. The Dodgers say that they're going with a committee, but Daniel Hudson told reporters on Monday that he will begin the season on the IL as expected. Chris, both Evan Phillips and Brusdar Graterol have looked very good so far this spring. What are you thinking with the Dodgers?
I think all three of those guys are probably going to get opportunities in the first month of the season. I tend to like targeting Phillips or Graterol later on in drafts. I think Graterol's got kind of a little bit of a Yohan Duran thing where he could just end up taking a huge step forward. And if he takes even half the saves, he's going to be a really good value. But, I think all three of them are probably pretty good pitchers, potentially very good pitchers. So I like them all at cost.
All right. For the Padres, Josh Hader. And then for the Giants, we know it's Camilo Doval, but they signed Taylor Rogers for a decent amount of money this offseason. And it wouldn't surprise me if, Doval got most of the saves last year. Maybe he's like 75%, 70%, and Rogers kind of mixes in there. But that's just me speculating. Let's take our final break here. We'll get to some news pretty late in the podcast and some players to target late in keeper leagues. We'll do that here on Fantasy Baseball Today. Before we get into news and notes, make sure to download and follow our 5-minute podcast, Fantasy Baseball Today in 5, wherever you listen to podcasts. News and notes. Why are the White Sox playing Eloy Jimenez in the outfield? He is day-to-day with cramping in his right calf. And yes, it was with him playing in the field. I think they should probably just give it up and play Eloy at DH. I don't know what to say because I've been talking up Eloy and he gets hurt every year and now he's dealing with a calf. So.
Well, they are classifying it as a cramp, which isn't a real injury. I had a calf cramp last night. It hurt like the dickens for like 3 minutes, and then it stopped hurting.
Just suck on a mustard packet. I think that's a thing people do.
Is that the remedy? Do you ever wake up in the middle of the night with a calf cramp? Is it calf cramp? Has that ever happened to you?
Not in the middle of the night, but sometimes I'll get like foot cramps just out of nowhere randomly while I'm sitting at my desk, and I'll just
I make a point to drink a lot of water. I've got my little cup that I fill up 6 times a day, probably. So I'm pretty well hydrated, guys. I think you guys just need to drink some more water.
What about when you wake up in the middle of the night and your leg is asleep? Now, I've been dealing with the arm my whole life, but the leg is a more recent development, and it's just
I
don't know about you guys. But until I get that feeling back, I'm convinced it's never going to come back, and I'm going to be an amputee. Those thoughts race through my mind as I'm waiting for the feeling to return.
I love these little hints of Scott's neuroses. I feel like he hides them relatively well, and so I love when we get them.
I haven't had the leg. I've definitely had the arm, but I don't know. Hopefully not anytime soon.
Leg's worse.
Kyle Wright gave up 4 runs over 2 2/3 innings in his spring debut on Monday. There was no StatCast data in that game, but beat writers said his fastball velocity was down in his return, and he obviously coming back from a shoulder injury. Scott, you have been glass half full on Kyle Wright. What do you think about the debut?
It wasn't great. It's hard to make anything of it because it's his first start of the spring, and we normally wouldn't react in an extreme way, one way or the other, to somebody's first start of spring training. It sounds like they're planning on him to make his first turn still. I hope he looks better next time out. But it's the sort of thing where I'm not inclined to lower him in my rankings based on it.
Chris, were you about to have a massive sneeze? Because it seemed like you were inhaling to do it, and then
No, it's just it was a little yawny. This is one of the bad things about having the podcast on video is like I can mute myself when I'm yawning, but when I get, because like you guys work, I don't work mornings, but like I'm up at like 9:30, and I start working at like 10:30, and so like it's a little bit of a long day for me. So yeah, we at least once per podcast, I'm trying really hard to stifle a yawn, and I'm sure I look like an absolute idiot.
you don't have to explain yourself to either of us. There, Chris.
Actually, I'm a little offended because he's
Yeah,
close.
you got kids. I always forget. You wake
No.
up.
I just it's boring. I'm boring you, is what you were saying. Clearly.
No, I mean no. This is I always I yawn a lot just in general. I'm just a yawny person, and so like it happens a lot at concerts. And I always feel really bad, especially if it's at like a small venue. Like, I'm sorry. It's nothing personal. I just yawn, I'm sorry. My brain's not getting enough oxygen.
No, Chris is actually very considerate because Frank and I are the night owls who are working until the wee hours of the morning and then sleeping until almost the afternoon. And Chris is willing to podcast with us in spite of that. So that's very, very considerate of him.
Jared Kelnick.
I mean, look, it's not like I'd be asleep right now anyway.
Jared Kelnick left Monday's game due to minor quad tightness. His massive spring has continued. He's hitting bombs and he's running. Dan Hayes of The Athletic reported that Alex Kirilloff might not be ready in time for opening day as he continues to battle that wrist injury. Scott?
Yes.
Just thought I'd let you know that about
No,
Alex
Kirilloff.
Kirilloff.
Look, what was I saying at the top of the show? We can't bury players just because they aren't going to be there for opening day, especially when it's one you can stash on in an IL spot in the meantime. It's a long season, and opening day status is an overrated part of it.
Yohan Moncada left his WBC game Sunday night after colliding with a teammate. He's dealing with a bruised rib and came up negative for a concussion. Tommy Henry was sent down by the D-backs, which means one of Dre Jameson and Ryan Nelson will be the team's fifth starter. Hyunjin Ryu said that he hopes to rejoin the Blue Jays rotation sometime in July. Even in the deepest, I can't imagine having too much interest in Hyunjin Ryu.
I mean, look, if you got IL spots to play with and it doesn't cost you a draft pick or any salary money, then fine. If you can just pick them up on waivers and stash them, sure. Like even if you have 5 IL spots, grab 5 guys who are injured. You'll probably end up dropping them because you'll have your own injuries, but there's no reason not to.
Exactly. Good point. John Means, pick him up. You got free IL space.
JMB, John Means Business. Maybe. We'll see. A few more prospects that got sent down. Addison Barger with the Toronto Blue Jays. Bryce Miller of the Mariners. I know the Welsh is a big fan. And Nolan Jones, who we thought maybe had some deep sleeper appeal, sent down by the Rockies. He was having a pretty bad spring. Some Monday performances of note. Kyle Bradish had his best Dylan Cease impersonation, allowed 9 earned runs over 2 1/3. He's
That was right after the 8 strikeout and 4 inning performance for Kyle Bradish. I was starting to warm up to him.
I like it.
Then
I know.
What happened?
I don't know where this came from. Yeah, I mean,
I don't know. I wasn't able to find any commentary on it immediately after the start. But yeah, it was ugly outing for Kyle Bradish.
Somebody's name who we have not mentioned one time this offseason. Derek Hall came on for a pinch hit 2-run single against a lefty. And he's 13 for 42 this spring. He's batting .310. He's got 5 home runs and should be the strong side of a platoon at DH for the Phillies until Bryce Harper is back. So the first half of the season, this is a deep league play, but this guy is crushing the ball. It's a good lineup and it's a good venue to hit into in Philadelphia. So I'm kind of interested in deeper leagues.
I had Derek. I talked last week about my deep sleepers article that was coming out, and I said it'd be about 30. It actually ended up being 40 deep sleepers. Derek Hall was among them. Derek Hall showed good power when he got called up last year, but struck out 31% of the time, so he didn't stick around for long. This spring, in addition to all those home runs, 8 strikeouts and 44 plate appearances. Granted, it's spring,
right,
but it's encouraging considering that was Derek Hall's biggest issue.
I actually have a note just like that, Scott. Josh Young had 3 hits on Monday. He's now batting .342 with 3 homers and 5 doubles this spring. His strikeout rate is 14.6%, following the 38% he posted as a rookie. So I get it.
Yep.
Quality of competition plays in here, but 14.6%, that's exactly what we needed to see from Josh Young.
It is. And, after I was saying the same thing for Derek Hall, I'm not trying to undermine the point, but the bigger issue, I think, because we talked in Young's case specifically, how much he struggled against sliders, how many sliders is he actually seeing? Like what percentage of this spring have pitchers been throwing their usual amount of sliders?
For what it's worth,
no idea.
For what it's worth, Baseball Reference does have a quality of opposition thing for their spring stats. It's a 1 to 10 scale, 1 being opposing batter is a pitcher, 10 being MLB quality. His is at 7.8, so it's just below AAA.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would expect Josh Young to strike out 15% of the time against AAA competition, so it's notable, even though it is a small sample size. But look, this is what we wanted to see from the young Tigers guys, right? Like all of them, Riley Green, Spencer Torkelson, Josh Young I just got confused with Chase Young.
Are you thinking?
I'm
thinking about his brother.
But this is what we wanted to see with these types of young guys who came into last season with so much potential and really struggled, is hitting well in the spring. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be good. It's better than the alternative. Like, that's all you can say at this point. It's not actionable. You shouldn't move Josh Young way up your draft board because of this, but you should already have him in your you should already have him in your sleeper conversation anyway. If you're looking for a late round third baseman with some upside, Josh Young should already be in that discussion. Riley Green should already be in your draft board in the middle rounds, Spencer Torkelson in the late rounds. This is what you want to see.
All right. For Matt Olson, he hit another home run. He's now 14 for 32. He's batting .438 this spring with 6 home runs. Maybe that second year on a new team, he's even better. Would not surprise me one bit for Matt Olson. And last but not least, Justin Verlander had 6 walks in 4 2/3 innings of work. It's just weird to see for Justin Verlander.
Did you see? Maybe it was like Zach Greinke. Did you see Zach Greinke's most recent start? He was working on his pickoff throws. He threw 10 pickoff throws in 3 innings, I think. And he didn't like outright say it, but he implied that he pitched poorly on purpose in order to work on his pickoff throws.
Interesting.
Which is just what a delight. Never retire Zach Greinke.
Yeah, it's about as Zach Greinke as it gets. Let's wrap up with a quick discussion on keeper league players to target. And what I mean by this is injured players who you're drafting. If you play in a keeper league where the value carries over year, if I draft a player in round 10, I get to keep them for a 10th round pick the next year, or it moves up 1 or 2 rounds, whatever it might be. Somebody like Bryce Harper should probably go a little bit earlier than he actually is going. His ADP,
a lot earlier.
Yeah, his ADP is 143.5. That's round 12 in a 12-team league. Likely to miss the first half of the season with Tommy John surgery. One of my buddies texted me today. He said, in a keeper league, where should I draft Bryce Harper? I'm like, that's a really good question. I haven't really thought about it. So, Scott, it sounds like you have thought about it. Where did you draft Bryce Harper in a keeper league?
Yeah, so I was trying to see where he went in our Dynasty startup mock. We did a couple of them, one for head-to-head points and one for rotisserie. And I want to say he went as early as round 3 in one of them. Now, that's earlier than I would go. I'd want it to be an obvious discount. Otherwise, what's the point? But maybe by like round 5, round 6.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, round 5.
Taking Harper. And it also depends how many keepers we're talking about, because a lot of keeper leagues just keep 4 or 5 guys. Okay, probably not worth.
I would say in that context, Bryce Harper's still worth it.
He's still worth keeping, but is it worth potentially crippling your team for the current year?
Sure.
When you're deciding on just 4 or 5 players at the end to keep. So, not as high a priority to draft Harper in that format. But if it's a league with little roster turnover, you're keeping 10 plus players, let's say. A dynasty startup was the idea I was comparing. I was proposing here. Then then yeah, I think a pick as early as round 5 or 6 makes sense for Harper.
My home keeper league, it's head-to-head points, 12-team league. We keep 4 players every year. So you would not push Bryce Harper up, like maybe even say round 10, just so I can keep him for a round 9 pick next year.
Round 10's not a stretch anyway if it's a shallower league.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So that's fine.
Good to know. I'll write that down. Trevor Story's ADP is 253, round 21. Obviously not as big of a priority or difference maker that Bryce Harper is. But Chris, what do you think? Would you push him up? I don't know, maybe like round 15, 16, something like that, just to hold on to him and maybe have a good keeper for next year?
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like some of the drafts I do, Trevor Story goes way later than 253. I mean, I think he was still there well into the 300s in my TGFBI league, which doesn't have IL spots. But yeah, that's the kind of thing where like, yeah, I would push him up in like round 15-ish because I think the chances of a bounce back season were decent. You know, he was changing leagues and playing out of Coors Field for the first time. So I think a bounce back was a reasonable expectation. So yeah, I would say 15, 16, that makes sense. But honestly, you might not even have to. People are really down on Trevor Story.
Injured pitchers to draft late in keeper leagues. Walker Buehler, likely to miss the entire season. Tommy John, Shane Baz, same story there. Tyler Glasnow, we know, is probably going to miss the first month or so of the season this year. Tarek Skubal, he's placed on the 60-day IL, so he's got some time before he returns, but he kind of looked like he was breaking out last year. John Means, Hyunjin Ryu, we mentioned those names earlier. Scott, what are your thoughts on these as keepers later on in drafts?
So I am in a couple of score sheet leagues, which are kind of a half sim, half fantasy league, 24 teams, so deep. I have Walker Buehler in both. And I believe, at least in one of them, I traded for him last year, just with the idea of holding on to him through this year and then having an ace thereafter. It's not a guarantee, of course, because this is his second Tommy John surgery, which isn't as straightforward as the first. But I think it's a good idea. Shane Baz, I think I actually traded for Shane Baz in the other, so that's been a pretty high priority there. Those are the two who have like high end. Their potential is so high end that I think it is worth going the extra mile for them in a keeper situation. It is worth sacrificing a little in the current year to get them. You know, I talk about how John Means should be a great fit with the Camden Yards, the new dimensions there. But it's not as assured. It's not as clear that he has legitimate high end upside. So that's more of a late flyer situation. And I'd put Tarek Skubal more in that category as well. One who you didn't mention here, who I took in, I believe it was around 16 of one of those 24 team score sheet leagues, Max Meyer.
Yep.
Good one.
You're well, I guess he is on the 40-man roster, so he probably will.
He'll be on the 60-day IL.
Yeah, he'll be on the 60-day IL, so you will be able to stash him in an IL spot. And obviously hasn't proven much of anything at the major league level, but at this time last year, we all considered him a top 5 pitching prospect, and have plenty of upside.
I would also add another guy that you didn't mention is Frankie Montas, who
I was just going
we're not expecting much this year, but obviously, and he sort of feels like a guy who it's just going to go off the rails and we're never going to really see him again, but he's under contract for next year. And, you know, there's at least a chance. So he's definitely someone. It would have to be like one of your last round picks, but I would throw him out there as well.
Is he under contract, Chris? Because I feel like this might be a contract year for Frankie Montas.
Maybe. I assumed he had another year left. And then Chris Paddock as well. He's actually going to pitch this year. He probably will be back by midseason, but that's another name that, you know, never lived up to the hype, but, you know, yeah, he's a free agent at the end of this year. Sorry, Frankie Montas.
Yep. All right. Well,
not sorry to Frankie Montas, but
sorry to us.
Sorry
for yawning, right?
Sorry to
Frankie. I'm sorry for yawning.
Just sorry for everything.
Montas. All right, we're going to wrap there. For Scott and Chris, I am Frank. Thank you all for listening and watching Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify, wherever you listen, and we'll be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.